Hi, I'm Tori Wielt, Senior Solutions Manager at New Relic. Welcome to today's webinar, Seriously, Defining the Principles, Habits, and Practices of Site Reliability Engineering. Today's speaker is Beth Long, Senior Software Engineer at New Relic. We're thrilled to have you here, Beth. Welcome.
Delighted to be here.
Great, thanks. Before we get started, I've got a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded, so you'll get a link after the webinar so you can listen to it again and or share it with your friends. Be sure and queue up your questions. There's a questions panel in the GoToMeeting application, the UI, so you can just give your questions, and Beth is open to all sorts of questions about SRE-ness, so we'd love to hear from you. And finally, there'll be a brief survey about the webinar for any additional questions or feedback, so please don't be shy. So if you're not familiar with New Relic, we are a leading solution for over 16,000 customers who rely on us to understand their most critical applications and infrastructure. We operate at tremendous scale, consuming 1.8 billion with a B, metrics per minute. We've helped many companies migrate from creating software in a traditional siloed way to doing modern software delivery. So if you're interested, we'd love to help you too. And New Relic has its own DevOps migration story, and we'll be sharing a part of that today. So without further ado, let's hear about defining the principles, habits, and practices of site reliability engineering. Take it away, Beth.
Thanks, Tori. I am delighted to be here with all of you today, and I want to take just a moment as we start to reflect on what you're here to get out of this webinar. What is your interest in site reliability engineering? How does it play into your role at your company? And I'd like to kick us off with a quote from Margaret Hamilton, where she talks about part of the Apollo program culture being learning from everyone and everything, including from that which one would least expect. And this really sets up the broader philosophical underpinnings of site reliability engineering as a discipline that requires a lot of curiosity, humility, and openness. And this quote is taken from the Google Site Reliability Engineering Handbook, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And we're going to be diving into some specifics and more concrete applications of SRE today. But I wanted to start with that broader perspective that this discipline takes. Now, I just mentioned the Site Reliability Engineering Handbook from Google. This is the book that really introduced site reliability engineering, or SRE, into the broader tech culture. And it's been a fantastic resource for those of us in the field for a number of years. The question that it raises is always, how do you actually apply all of these wonderful principles and habits and practices if you're not operating at Google's scale? And who is, right? All of us are dealing with different challenges and opportunities than Google. And so what we're going to look at today is, in particular, how New Relic has applied these practices and some of the lessons that we've learned about the nitty-gritty of SRE. So let's set the scene by talking about what site reliability engineering actually is, not as a broad philosophical concept, but as a practical discipline. Site reliability engineering really applies the software engineering mindset to the practice of operations. So unlike software engineering, which primarily focuses on the software development lifecycle itself, and unlike pure traditional ops, which focuses very heavily on system maintenance, keeping things alive, so to speak, site reliability engineering combines these two and focuses on the entire system lifecycle. If we look at the quote from Ben Traynor-Sloss, who originated the term site reliability engineering, he says that SRE is what happens when you ask a software engineer to design an operations function. So when we talk about SRE, we are really thinking about reliability of systems from inception all the way through to operation and finally to decommissioning, that entire system lifecycle. we're going to talk today about three specific things. We're going to talk about the goal of SRE as continual improvement of reliability of systems at New Relic for our entire platform. We're going to talk about two specific ways that we express the SRE role at New Relic, so-called pure SRE and embedded SRE. And we're going to explore three spheres of influence that SREs can have: stability, reliability, and engineering. And we're going to look at the practical ways that SREs can support those three spheres in their day-to-day jobs. So going back to the history of SRE at New Relic, for a long time, we have been practicing SRE under that name, Site Reliability Engineering. For quite a while at New Relic, as at other places, SRE on the ground tended to be a catch-all term for people who were doing operational work in some way or another. So a lot of people who would have traditionally been called network engineers or operations engineers or other similar titles kind of ended up in this SRE job title, but there wasn't always a comprehensive strategic application of site reliability engineering throughout the organization. And so we looked at how we were applying SRE and how it was failing on its promise. And we wanted to refine how we delivered SRE, and we did that by talking to our stakeholders. So we asked our stakeholders things like, why do we have SREs at New Relic in the first place? How do they differ from these more traditional job functions? What is the vision for our SRE team? And how can SREs most effectively contribute to the future of the platform? What are SREs doing that's new and valuable and interesting? And the stakeholders that we talked to were both our external end users, who are the customers of the New Relic platform, and our internal users, the folks who are actually building the systems. Because site reliability engineering concerns itself with both of these spheres. What the end users of a system are actually experiencing really underpins the definition of reliability for a system, and how the people who build the system are experiencing their day-to-day work is also a critical component that SREs are thinking about. So we had to look at this through both of those lenses. And so what came out of those discussions was a refinement both of how we applied SRE broadly through the organization and how we built the SRE function as specific roles. So the goal of site reliability engineering at New Relic is continuous improvement of the reliability of systems in the New Relic platform. And that means that SRE isn't about coming in, fixing a problem, and then moving on. It's about really engaging, like we talked about at the beginning, in that entire system life cycle. And we're going to drill down in a couple minutes into how you actually do that on the ground. Now, to accomplish that, we now have two primary expressions of the site reliability engineer role here at New Relic. We have so-called pure SREs who are on teams that are more operationally focused. These are teams like our orchestration and containerization platform, our database team, our network engineering team, many of the teams that build and support our data platform. These are teams that are providing the platform that the product teams need in order to do their job. And so folks who have the SRE title on these teams tend to be very focused on SRE that will support the entire company. Then we have embedded site reliability engineers. These are SREs who are embedded in product-oriented teams. They are first-class members of their team, so they don't rotate in for a short period of time and then rotate out. They actually function every day on their team, side by side with software engineers, engineering managers, product managers, to work on the entire goal of that product's mission. So these embedded SREs focus on reliability, tooling, the scalability of their services. And they work with the more quote unquote pure SREs through things like communities of practice and other ways that we have of connecting SREs throughout the organization, but they have that slightly different focus. We also have another role called the Site Reliability Champion that operates a level up from these two roles and kind of connects the dots from multiple teams. They act kind of like reliability architects, and they've been a fantastic introduction to our SRE ecosystem by allowing us to understand cross-cutting issues that impact multiple teams and really be able to facilitate those discussions at a higher level with executives and product management in a way that the people who are down on the ground day to day doing the work don't always have the opportunity to do. So the SREs who are either on those pure operationally oriented teams or in that embedded SRE role all focus on three spheres of influence: stability, reliability, and engineering. What are these things talking about? Well, first of all, stability focuses on the more traditional operational aspects. So they're going to be looking at the things that need to happen to make sure that a service or a platform is stable enough that software engineers can do what they need to do to extend the functionality. So SREs who are on more mature teams tend to not to need to focus as much on stability because it's already built into things. SREs who come into teams that are in a bit more of a difficult spot reliability-wise might need to spend more of their energy focusing on things like improving on call rotations, building out run books, looking at capacity for the team services. The second sphere is reliability. And this sphere is about not just keeping things alive, but actually investing in iterative improvement of services. So where stability focuses more on the nitty-gritty of the moment-by-moment operations, reliability starts to take a broader view. Here's where you start to think about the architecture of the services themselves, the team process, longer-term capacity planning, improving monitoring and alerting, and really transforming services from just being stable to having a more resilient long-term reliability story. And then finally, we look at engineering. And here's where you get into the longer-term view of participating in the design and redesign of systems, looking at coming in during the conception phase before things have been implemented, rather than being brought in order to prop up something that is struggling because it didn't have reliability built into it from day one. And this really gets at one of the critical aspects of site reliability engineering and what differentiates it from the more traditional operational orientation. Site reliability engineering really is about thinking about your services and reliability as part of the bigger picture of the entire service lifecycle. So where a more traditional operational focus might come in and say, well, you have a problem with capacity, we're going to spin up more servers. An SRE really is going to come in and say, why are we having capacity problems? Is it a problem with how we're architected? Have we scaled past what the current design can support? Do we have a problem on the finance side where we're not communicating clearly with finance about provisioning capacity early enough? It might be a technical problem, it might be a social problem. An SRE is going to come in and really look at things with that 360-degree view and try to understand the deeper problems and how to head them off early in the process. So SREs focus on stability if things are struggling. They always focus on reliability and how to build that into the system. and they take an engineering approach, participating in the entire life cycle of services to think about how to improve the reliability over the long term. So those are the three spheres. I touched on a couple of specific topics. Let's actually start to do a little bit of a deeper dive and get into how SREs exert their influence in those three spheres. So championing reliability best practices is a key activity of site reliability engineers. And that means that they both have to know what best practices are, and they have to be effective at implementing them and getting buy-in from everybody on the team to actually implement those. They guide designs and processes, really thinking about resilience, which is a big term that we'll talk about in just a moment, and low toil. Toil is another big word that you might think you know what it means, but it's very important to have a clear understanding of what it actually means at a technical level. So I'll touch on that in just a moment. SREs think a lot about reducing technical complexity and sprawl, really helping teams to make wise decisions and wise trade-offs as they are working on their services. Complexity is the world that we live in today, and with complexity comes uncertainty, and in very complex systems, inherent unknowability. When you're dealing with complex systems, you can never fully understand them. And so an SRE knows that and really works with their teams to constrain the scope of that complexity so that it is more manageable. SREs drive the usage of tooling and common components. And here's again where SREs play a very strong social role of understanding the ecosystem in which they are operating. At New Relic, really understanding the common components that we have built, both for infrastructure and for software tooling, and encouraging teams to adopt those common components so that they can spend their time doing new and interesting things rather than reinventing the wheel. And SREs, of course, implement software and tooling to improve resilience and to automate operations, really thinking about how they can apply the don't repeat yourself or DRY principle from software engineering at an operational level. What are people doing over and over again manually that they can build a tool for that will automate that away and again, free up humans to do what humans do best, which is to think creatively. So digging into some of those things just another level down, working with teams to adopt operational best practices. This is a two-pronged approach, like I mentioned earlier, of really being tapped into the industry and understanding what the best practices are in general, and then being able to come in with their teams and say, hey, I think that we should try this different on-call rotation, or we need to implement a risk matrix. We haven't done that yet. Let's pull out a spreadsheet, list out the things that might go wrong with their service, rate them on likelihood and severity, and let's use that to start to drive our reliability work. Maybe a team already has a risk matrix, and the SRE is going to be the one that needs to come in and say, hey, we've got a risk matrix and we haven't touched it in a year and a half. I'm thinking things have changed a little bit. Let's go back and revisit that and actually implement changes based on what we discover in that risk matrix session. They're going to work on things like building out good run books, prioritizing reliability work, implementing game days where you try out injecting faults into your system and actually running a game day where you follow through with the consequences of those faults. So this is a really important aspect of SRE work. Staying current at New Relic on our platform, understanding the top risks for their teams. Again, really having their finger on the heartbeat of the company. And this applies for us and for our customers. Many times software engineers get unplugged from the bigger ecosystem and they don't know what other teams have already done, problems that they've already solved. A big part of SRE is keeping your ears tuned for those things and being able to connect the dots for people and say, hey, this other team has already solved the problem. We're not going to do the same thing. Or let's not build our own caching solution. That's a problem that's already been solved. We're going to go out and use something that's compatible with our company's ecosystem and make use of that. Again, same theme, building and helping teams adopt those shared internal platform components. Really important for SREs to have their antenna up at all times for understanding what's happening in the larger company. Improving monitoring and observability. This is a big part of the SRE role because SREs really need to have that on-the-ground understanding of how systems operate in the real world, not how they're supposed to operate on paper. This is where SREs can really support more traditional software engineers by helping them to shorten the feedback loop between problems in the operation of a system and the things that the software engineers are doing to improve reliability or to build new features. So we see at a lot of our customers that more traditional siloing of the operations and software engineering functions, and it makes it really difficult for the business to move forward in intelligent ways because there is such a long cycle of getting information from operations to software engineering, having that feedback between the two groups. By having SREs that are on our teams embedded with them, they are able to make that feedback cycle a matter of hours instead of a matter of weeks or months. Now, we talked earlier a little bit about Toil. I mentioned this term. And you might think that you know what Toil is when you hear that term, but it's a very specific technical term. It's not work I don't like doing. It's not grungy work, as they say in the Site Reliability Engineering Handbook. What it is manual, repetitive, undifferentiated work, very operational, and work that scales linearly as your systems grow. Things that you have to do manually that don't really add much value. Restarting a server when it goes down. Running very specific run books that you've worked out, oh, when such and such a thing happens, we just go in and we do A, B, and C. An SRE will come in and say, well, if you're always doing A, B, and C, why don't we write a tool that can do A, B, and C for us? And then we have time to go do more interesting things. Auto-detecting problems and rolling back after common problems. And then even more than just automating away Toil by building tooling that can do it on our behalf, then looking at the problems that that Toil is pointing at and helping to build better systems in the first place. Mentoring is also a really important role of SRE. This plays many functions. SREs at New Relic are expected to mentor less senior SREs and to participate in the broader community. Because SRE is such a broad discipline and it encompasses so many aspects of the entire system, it's even more important than for your average person for SREs to be talking to each other and cultivating their connections with each other. They really need to understand what's going on throughout the entire company. They need to understand how problems in one area of the system are going to be affecting them. They need to understand what innovations are happening that they can capitalize on or contribute to. And so mentoring and participating in the SRE community is a really important part of SRE. And it's something, again, that we hear about again and again from our customers is how do you deal with the challenge of keeping SREs connected with each other and growing? So mentoring and participating in community, really important for SRE at New Relic. And last and least in this situation is the actual performing of task-based operational work, Toil. Yes, SREs end up getting saddled with this work a lot of the time. And as a result of that, we have developed some measures internally so that we can get an understanding of when SREs are getting bogged down with this toil. Ideally, they should not be working on this kind of work themselves more than 30 to 50% of the time, depending on other constraints, ideally under 30%. And ideally, they should be doing this work primarily so that they can understand it and then automate it away. So what are keys to success in SRE? Well, one of the first keys is understanding what reliability is in the first place. Reliability isn't the end-all be-all of any system. It is itself a feature. It's something that you need enough of, but figuring out what enough reliability looks like is very difficult. So having a conversation that's ongoing with stakeholders is a really important part of SRE. Talking both to the end users of your product or system and talking with the people who build the system itself. It's really important to remember that with these complex systems, we are actually a part of the very systems that we're creating. And so we have to talk with the people who are building it as much as looking at the software and hardware itself to really understand what's necessary to build, maintain, and operate those systems in a healthy way. Reliability really depends on a shared understanding of what reliability is and what you're aiming at. And so once you've had those conversations, you have to develop clear and specific guidelines that guide engineers in understanding whether they're meeting their targets and stakeholders in understanding what is happening and when the system is healthy and not. Service level indicators, service level objectives, service level agreements, that is a foundational part of SRE. There's a great talk that Elisa Bennett and Matthew Flaming from New Relic have done that you can find a video of online where they talk about our road to developing SLIs and SLOs. But a lot of companies aren't there yet. And so you may have to develop some other initial rubric that you use to measure your reliability until you can get to that holy grail of SLIs and SLOs. And finally, as you can hear from everything we've been talking about, SRE is a very challenging, very cross-disciplinary practice. So building that strong SRE community is critical. And whatever mechanisms you already have in place at your company, we have communities of practice and unconfs and Slack channels and other ways that SREs can stay connected. Whatever it is that you need to do to build that into your company is going to be critical to having a successful SRE program. So to recap, the goal of SRE, continuous improvement of reliability of systems, not a one-time in and out, fix a problem, but that ongoing participation in the reliability of systems. We have these two roles, the pure SRE who are on the very operationally focused teams and the embedded SREs who operate in the more product-focused teams to support reliability. And then those three spheres of influence: stability, where you're really looking at the day-to-day operations; reliability, where you're broadening out and thinking about the bigger picture of reliability through the system lifecycle; and the engineering discipline, where you bring those broader software engineering skills into the reliability realm and participate from beginning to end in the development of systems. So that is a quick walkthrough of what site reliability is and how we express it at New Relic. I hope that this was useful. And now I think we're going to go back to Tori because we would like to hear from you about your questions about SRE.
Wow, thanks, Beth. This has been some great information. Yes, go ahead and ask your questions in the panel, the GoToWebinar panel. And if we don't have time for all of them, don't be afraid. Go ahead and put them up. We've already had requests to post the slides. We'll definitely make sure that happens. You will get a link to this recording afterwards. And I suspect, since it's so popular, we're probably going to do a blog of some of these questions and answers because we really have a lot of engagement. So Beth, yes, we do have some great questions already. The first one, which I love, in our company, the ops team just got renamed the SRE team. What are they supposed to be doing?
Oh, this is a great one. And I hear this so often. So what's probably actually going to happen is that at first they're just going to continue as operations engineers and have a new job title. And of course, that's obviously not what we want to happen. What they should be doing is, first of all, making sure that the team has a good mix of the different disciplines that play into SRE. So if it's an existing team that just got transformed with the name, make sure you're bringing in some software engineers or some new SREs who really have a strong background more in software engineering than in operations. And make sure that the team is starting to really take steps back and get out of the reactive loop that is so common in operations and starting to think about that proactive loop. That's going to look like a lot of different things depending on the size and maturity of the organization, but making sure that the team has the managerial and executive support to not spend more than, say, 50% of their time on that Toil class of very undifferentiated operational work and protecting ferociously 50% or so of time to step back and think about how to automate away Toil and participate in building reliability in earlier in the life cycle is really important. So I think that managerial support is the critical step for a new SRE team to actually be able to do what they're supposed to do.
Excellent. So I'm just going to ask then, how do you get managerial support?
That is a tough one. And it, again, depends so much on the company. The best case scenario, I can think of a couple customers I talked to over the summer who have managers who really do support true SRE. And so then what the managers need is they need some rubrics. They need to decide on those percentages. Okay, we're going to protect 50 or 20 or 60% of the time, whatever it is, and I'm going to commit to protecting that. And then they also need those objective measurements of reliability so that they can understand how to measure that the SRE team is having that bigger impact with this shift. And so instead of just following the day-to-day of, how many incidents did we have, really starting to have some kind of, whether it's service level indicators and objectives or just some kind of system health measurement that lets managers measure success and thereby build support for increasing the amount of time for the automation and engineering work. That'll really be important for managers to be able to make their case.
Excellent. So what are some of the tools used in SRE and your teams use?
Oh, the tools. There are so many. So monitoring and alerting is critical, obviously, because you have to have visibility into the system so that you can understand what it's doing and why. And so, for example, being able to understand how many times is my service getting visited by the out-of-memory killer, the killer? Why is that happening? What do we need to do, not just to prevent it from happening again, or not just to recover when it happens, but how do we open the conversation with the software engineers about what we need to do to prevent this from happening. Is it just a capacity issue, or do we have a deeper architectural issue that we need to address? Good SREs are working with a lot of systems programming languages. So, Go is incredibly popular with our SREs because it lets them build tooling that lets them automate away a lot of this toil. And so, a lot of different programming languages are in use just to be able to build that automation itself. And yeah, just in terms of tools, it's kind of whatever you need to get the job done. It's really more about understanding what to do based on the tools that you're using and how to use them more effectively.
Excellent. So one specific question, does your SRE team manage the software deployments to production?
So at New Relic, we have an internal build and deploy pipeline. And so every single team manages the deployment of all of their own services. So we, long time ago, had a central SRE team, but even at that time, every team handled their own deployments. This is not something every company can implement right away, but it enables teams, again, to really tighten that feedback loop. So they deploy, they're on call for their service. If they see a problem, they're the ones who are right in there right away resolving it, rather than it having to go to a NOC that then hands it off to someone else that then, wakes up the right engineer. So that build and deploy pipeline and our internal containerization and orchestration platform have been fantastic in increasing our ability to get things out to production quickly and then to deal with them effectively once they're in production.
Excellent. Well, Beth, thank you so much for your time, and thank you everyone for joining us. We had a few other questions, but we're out of time. But as I said, pay attention to blog.newrelic.com. We'll have the information, and you will get a link to this recording. Thank you so much, Beth, for joining us.
My pleasure.
And are you out at any conferences upcoming? Can people see you in the wild?
I will be doing a presentation on incident command at Velocity London on the 31st of October, and then we'll see what else after that.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And for more information, please drop by newrelic.com/devops, and we'll see you out in the field. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.